The wind moved low across the Montana plains, carrying the dry scent of sage and earth as it slipped through the tall grass and bent it in slow waves. Autumn had settled into the land with quiet certainty, turning the cottonwoods gold and painting the distant hills in soft shades of amber and rust. Caleb Rhodes rode alone along the narrow creek path, guiding his bay horse with loose reins and a mind heavy with thoughts he rarely spoke aloud. He was 36 years old, though the lines carved into his face made him appear older. Years of labor beneath open skies had hardened his hands and weathered his skin, and solitude had shaped his spirit into something steady, restrained and deeply private. His ranch lay far from town, nearly half a day's ride, and that distance was intentional. After losing his wife to illness 4 winters earlier, the quiet had become easier than company. Silence asked nothing of him. People did. The horse slowed suddenly, ears lifting, muscles tensing. Caleb felt it before he saw it, that subtle shift that told him something was wrong. He followed the animal's gaze toward a cluster of trees near the water's edge. Against the sunlit grass lay a shape that did not belong. He dismounted carefully, boots crunching through leaves as he approached. Each step brought clarity, and with it, dread. A woman lay crumpled near the creek, her body twisted unnaturally, her dress torn and darkened with dried blood. Bruises marred her face and arms. Deep purples and sickly yellows layered over skin stretched thin by hunger and pain. Her hair was tangled with dirt and clotted red, spread around her head like a broken crown. For one long, terrible moment, Caleb believed she was dead. Then she moved. The sound that escaped her lips was barely more than a breath, fragile and broken, but it shattered the stillness like thunder. Caleb dropped to his knees beside her, heart pounding, hands shaking as he brushed the hair away from her face. "Stay with me," he said softly, his voice rough from disuse. Her eyelids fluttered, revealing eyes dulled by fear and exhaustion. Her lips trembled. "It hurts." "I know," he replied, "but we have to move." "You're not safe here." She tried to pull away, dragging herself weakly through the grass, every motion slow and desperate. The sight struck him deeper than any wound. He raised his hands, lowering his voice the way he did with frightened animals. "I won't hurt you. I swear it. You're safe with me." Her eyes searched his face, scanning for threat, for cruelty, for the familiar signs she had learned to recognize too well. Finding none, she stopped resisting. Her body sagged, surrendering to exhaustion. Caleb removed his coat and wrapped it around her thin frame, realizing with a sharp ache how little she weighed. When he lifted her, her bones pressed against his arms through the fabric. Whoever had done this had not only beaten her, they had starved her. The ride back to the ranch was slow and careful. He held her close, feeling every shallow breath against his chest, counting them like promises. She drifted in and out of awareness, murmuring fragments of words, sometimes crying without sound. When they reached the cabin, he carried her inside and laid her gently on his own bed. Without hesitation, he rode hard to town for the doctor. The physician arrived hours later, his expression growing darker with each injury he examined. Broken ribs, a shoulder forced back into place incorrectly, dehydration, severe malnourishment, bruises layered over old bruises, telling a story that stretched far beyond a single beating. "She's been through something no one should survive," the doctor said quietly. "But she's strong. If she wants to live, she will." For 3 days, Caleb barely left her side. He fed her broth by spoon when she could swallow, changed bandages with hands trained to work gently despite their size, and spoke to her in a low, steady voice about the land, the seasons, the way the mountains turned purple at dusk. He talked not because she responded, but because silence felt dangerous. On the 4th day she spoke. Her name came out as a whisper. "Eliza." Relief washed through him so powerfully he had to sit down. He leaned closer. "I'm Caleb. You're safe here." She turned her face away, shame written in the small movement. "You should have left me," she said. "I'll only bring trouble." He answered without hesitation. "I decide what's worth trouble on my land." Her story unfolded slowly over the following weeks as her strength returned. She had once been a school teacher in Missouri. Educated, hopeful, she had married a man who promised protection and provided terror instead. When she fled, he hunted her down, beat her, and left her in the wilderness to die. "The law won't help," she told Caleb. "He owns too much, knows too many people." Caleb's response was calm and final. "Then let him come." As autumn gave way to winter, her body healed. The wounds inside her remained, but she refused to be idle, slowly bringing warmth and life back into a house that had known only grief. Curtains appeared at the windows. Bread baked in the mornings. Laughter, quiet and uncertain at first, returned to the walls. Caleb found himself changing too, though he barely noticed it at first. He slept in the barn so she could feel safe. He spoke to her with care, never touching unless invited, and without meaning to, without planning it, he fell in love. Winter arrived quietly at first, as it always did, slipping into the valley on cold mornings and pale sunsets, before announcing itself with snow. The cabin changed with the season, becoming warmer, fuller, more alive than it had been in years. Eliza moved slowly but with determination, reclaiming strength piece by piece. Each day she walked a little farther, stood a little longer, trusted her body a little more. Caleb watched all of it from a careful distance. He never hovered, never questioned. He offered help only when she asked, as if instinctively understanding that what she needed most was control over her own life again, respect, choice. She took over the kitchen first, insisting she could manage despite the pain that still lingered in her ribs. The first loaf of bread burned, and she laughed at herself. A soft, startled sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it did him. That laugh stayed with Caleb long after he left the room, echoing in places inside him he thought were long sealed shut. At night, when the wind howled against the cabin and snow stacked itself high along the walls, Eliza sometimes woke shaking from dreams she could not escape. Caleb never asked what she saw in them. He would light the lamp, sit nearby, and speak until her breathing slowed. He talked about simple things: weather, horses, a creek that froze so solid one winter he'd crossed it on foot. Ordinary words that anchored her to the present. Trust grew not in grand moments but in small ones. The way he always knocked before entering the room. The way he kept his eyes lowered when helping her change bandages. The way he never once asked for gratitude. Slowly, Eliza began to notice him. She noticed how gentle his hands were despite their size. How he spoke to animals with patience, never raising his voice. How grief still lived quietly behind his eyes, even when he smiled. One evening, as they sat near the fire, she asked about the photograph on the shelf. "Rebecca," he said simply. He told her about his wife, about the fever, about the way the house had gone silent afterward. Eliza listened without interrupting, understanding too well what loss did to a person. When he finished, she reached out and rested her hand lightly on his arm. He stilled, unsure, but did not pull away. Something shifted between them that night. Not romance, not yet. Something steadier. A recognition of shared pain, of survival. Days turned into weeks. Eliza grew stronger, her voice firmer, her eyes clearer. She borrowed books from town and read aloud in the evenings. Her voice hesitant at first, then confident. Caleb found himself looking forward to those hours, more than anything else in his day. He sat across from her, pretending to mend tack while listening to every word. She sang sometimes while working, unaware he could hear her from the barn. Soft, unguarded melodies that spoke of who she had been before fear reshaped her world. Caleb never told her he listened. Some things felt too fragile to acknowledge. Yet fear had not left her entirely. Some nights she stood at the window long after dark, watching the empty land as if expecting it to betray her. When Caleb asked what troubled her, she answered honestly, "He will come back." Caleb did not dismiss her fear. He did not comfort her with false promises. "If he does," he said, "I'll be here." That was all. Snow fell heavier as January settled in, burying the trails, sealing the world in white silence. Caleb spent long days hauling hay and checking cattle, riding farther from the cabin than usual. Eliza stayed behind, tending the fire, preparing meals, trying to convince herself she was safe. The sound of hoofbeats broke the stillness one afternoon. She froze, heart hammering, recognizing the cadence instantly. The door opened without invitation. He walked in like he owned the air itself, polished boots tracking snow across the floor, eyes sharp with cruel satisfaction. "You ran far, Eliza," he said pleasantly. Not far enough. Fear wrapped around her spine, but she stood her ground. She reached for the iron skillet, gripping it with both hands. "I won't go back." He smiled. "I'm not here to take you back." He stepped closer. "I'm here to end this." Her swing came fast and wild. He caught her wrist easily, twisting until the pan fell. Pain exploded across her face, dragging her backward into memories she thought she had escaped. Then the door burst open. Snow and wind flooded the room as Caleb stepped inside. Rifle raised, eyes steady and lethal. "Let her go." The men with him reached for their guns. Caleb fired first. One fell screaming. The other stopped, hands raised. The man released Eliza, backing away, confidence shattered. "You can't keep her," he said weakly. Caleb never lowered the rifle. "Watch me." What followed was not chaos, but certainty. The men left. The threat ended. Eliza collapsed against Caleb, shaking, crying into his coat as he held her without hesitation. "I've got you," he said again and again, and for the first time she believed it. She looked up at him, tears streaking her face, fear finally giving way to something else. "I love you," she whispered. Caleb did not rush her. He did not claim her words. He only answered when she finished speaking. "I love you too." Not as a promise, as a truth. The silence after they left felt heavier than the storm outside. Snow pressed against the cabin walls, muting the world, while the fire crackled low and steady. Eliza sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a blanket, her hands trembling despite the warmth. Caleb knelt in front of her, his rifle set aside, his presence calm but unyielding. "You're safe now," he said quietly. She nodded, though her body had not yet caught up with the truth. He stayed with her through the night, not sleeping, watching the fire burn down and then building it up again, guarding the door like a sentry. When exhaustion finally claimed her, she slept deeply, without dreams. Morning brought pale light and stillness. Caleb checked the land, following tracks until he was certain they were gone. He did not feel relief, only resolve. He knew men like the one who had come. They did not always stop the first time they were challenged, but he also knew something else now. He was no longer standing alone. Eliza woke later, stiff and sore, but alive. She found Caleb outside repairing a fence post broken by the storm. She watched him work for a long moment before speaking. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. He didn't look up. "Yes, I did." She stepped closer. "You could have let him take me. It would have been easier." Caleb straightened slowly, meeting her gaze. There's nothing easy about living with that kind of regret. Something settled between them then, solid and unspoken. From that day on, he no longer slept in the barn. Not because she asked him to move inside, but because fear no longer stood between them. Still, he remained careful. Every touch was deliberate. Every step forward waited for her to meet it. Winter dragged on, but life inside the cabin grew lighter. They worked side by side, shared meals, shared quiet. Love grew not in urgency but in patience. Caleb learned the sound of her laughter when she was truly relaxed. Eliza learned the way his expression softened when he watched her without realizing it. One evening, as the fire burned low, she spoke the fear she had been carrying. "What if he comes back?" Caleb answered honestly. "Then I'll protect you again." That wasn't enough for her. "What if someday you're not here?" He reached for her hand. "Then you'll still be strong, stronger than you know." Spring came late that year, but when it arrived, it did so with force. Snow melted into rushing water. Flowers pushed through frozen soil. And the valley breathed again. Eliza planted a small garden beside the cabin. Caleb built a porch where they could sit and watch the mountains change color at dusk. News reached them slowly, carried by travelers and town gossip. The man who had hunted her had been arrested far away, charged with crimes he could not escape. Another woman had not survived him, and her family had ensured justice followed. When Eliza heard, she cried, not from fear but release. Caleb held her while the last of the past finally loosened its grip. On a quiet evening in May, Caleb stood beside her in the fading light. "I don't want to rush you," he said. "I never have." She looked at him, eyes clear, steady. "You never did." He took a breath. "But I want a life with you. However that looks, however long it takes." She smiled, the kind of smile that reached every part of her face. "I already have a life with you." They married simply, with the town gathered around them. No grand ceremony, no spectacle, just promises spoken honestly. When Eliza walked toward him, she felt no fear, only certainty. That night, sitting together on the porch, she rested her head on his shoulder. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For finding me, and for never trying to own me, only standing beside me." Caleb kissed her hair. "You saved me too." The mountains stood around them, quiet and enduring. Witnesses to a love built not from rescue alone, but from respect, patience, and choice. Summer unfolded gently across the valley. Warm days stretching long and unhurried. Nights filled with the sound of insects and distant water moving through the creek. Life settled into a rhythm that felt natural, earned. Eliza woke each morning without fear tightening her chest. Caleb rode out to the fields with a lighter heart than he had known in years. The land responded to them, as if it recognized peace when it saw it. Eliza's garden flourished. Rows of vegetables pushed up through dark soil, stubborn and alive, much like she had been. She spent hours tending it, hands deep in the earth, breathing in the simple joy of watching something grow because she had cared for it. Caleb often paused in his work just to watch her, marveling at how strength could look so gentle. They talked often about everything and nothing, about books and seasons, about the life Eliza had once imagined and the one she was building now, about Rebecca, spoken of without pain, only gratitude for the love that had been and the lessons it had left behind. Caleb never felt guilt for loving again. Love, he learned, was not a finite thing. It did not replace what came before. It expanded. Town life slowly drew Eliza back into the world. At first she stayed close to Caleb's side, uncertain, watching faces for signs of danger that never came. People greeted her kindly, curious but respectful. Over time, she began helping at the small schoolhouse, reading to children, rediscovering the part of herself that had once thrived in learning and teaching. Each step beyond the ranch felt like a victory. Caleb remained steady, never pushing, never pulling. When Eliza doubted herself, he reminded her of what she had already survived. When fear surfaced unexpectedly, he did not tell her it was gone. He reminded her she was no longer alone. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the mountains blush with sunset, Eliza spoke softly. "I used to think my life ended by that creek." Caleb turned toward her. "It didn't." "I know," she said, "but sometimes I wonder who I would have been if none of it had happened." He considered her words carefully. "Maybe you wouldn't be this strong, or this kind, or standing here now." She smiled faintly. "I like who I am becoming." "So do I." They sat in silence after that, content in the shared understanding that healing was not about erasing the past, but about building something new on top of it. Years passed quietly. The ranch prospered. Laughter filled the cabin more often than silence ever had. Eliza's voice grew confident, her eyes bright. Caleb's world expanded beyond survival into something richer, deeper, and more meaningful than he had dared hope for after loss. Sometimes storms came. Arguments happened. Memories resurfaced. But none of it broke them. They faced each challenge side by side, choosing each other again and again, not because they needed saving, but because they wanted to walk forward together. One night, long after the fire burned low, Eliza rested her head against Caleb's chest and spoke words that held no fear. "I'm glad he didn't kill me." Caleb's arms tightened around her. "So am I." Not just because she lived, but because she lived fully. Because she found a place where love was not pain, where strength did not require hardness, and where her future was her own. The woman who had been beaten and left to die did more than survive. She reclaimed herself, and the man who found her broken by a creek discovered that love, when given freely and patiently, could heal two lives at once. If you enjoyed this story, support the channel by subscribing, liking the video, and sharing it with others who love emotional Western stories. Your support helps keep these stories alive.